Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaskar. You have stepped into a course that is going to change the way that you look at data. Not just how you analyze it, but also how you communicate it. My name is Nivid Desai. I serve as the Program Executive at Writing Studio IIT Gandhinagar. Welcome to Writing for Data Science. This course is at the intersection of analysis and communication. As all of us know, data analysis is not just about coding and models. It is about solving real-world problems. And that is exactly why every single thought that goes into solving those problems needs to be communicated. And not just to one audience, across multiple stakeholders. That is where this course comes in. This course prepares you with the foundations of writing, especially curated for data science. We will discuss audience analysis, critical thinking, logical reasoning, as well as storytelling that is native to data science. So join me on a journey at the intersection of numbers and narratives. I'll see you in class. Namaste, hello and welcome to Writing for Data Science. My name is Nivid Desai and we are on an interesting journey to explore the intersections between numbers and narratives. Since the past two lectures, we have begun the last and final module of our course, Storytelling with Data. Since the last two lectures, we have been introducing ourselves with the nuances of storytelling as an art form, and we have also seen the foundations and fundamentals of storytelling through structure and patterns. In today's lecture, I want to take our conversation a little further. Beyond structures and patterns, I now want to take our conversation a little further into why stories matter, but not only at a surface level reasoning point of view. I want to take it a step forward and introduce the science of storytelling, not just about why they matter in terms of effect, but also how they work on people's thinking, memory, and decision-making skills. So, today we are going to look at the importance of stories from three different angles: cognition, memory, and decision-making. If you feel like some of these words may be new or maybe from a different context, rest assured, we will be looking at each word in its detail and understand why they matter in the realm of storytelling. Stories are not just entertainment. That is what we have discussed since the past two lectures as well. Especially when we talk about data stories, they are not necessarily like fiction, like our fairy tales, fables, and children's stories, novels, films. All of them may be for entertainment, but our stories are not just for entertainment. They are powerful tools that shape the way our brains work. They also mold our thinking patterns in certain directions. Stories are important from a cognitive, memory, and decision-making perspective, especially in data science writing. They help people think clearly, remember better, and make smarter decisions. And that is the entire area that we are going to discuss today. Before we move forward, I would like you to think of a moment when a story helped you remember something better than a fact. What was the story? What did you remember from it? It is highly likely that this happens to us in childhood, when we are taught new concepts and new ways to look at the world by our parents and our elder people around us. They often tell us stories to make sure that we remember the fact underlying within the story. So think about those stories. What did you learn from them? And why did you remember that clearly? Let us begin looking at the core focal points of our session today. Let's begin with stories and cognition. Now, I understand if this may be a new word for many of us, but put it simply, cognition refers to the way we perceive, process, and understand information. It is, by and large, our thinking process. Our brains are wired to understand narratives more efficiently than raw data. When we encounter plain data, our brain has to work hard to make sense of it. This happens oftentimes when we look at a table or we look at raw spreadsheets. That data does not appeal to us because we have to work tirelessly to make sense out of it ourselves. Now, I understand that most of us are trained as analysts, but in this case, we are looking at it as communicators. Therefore, when our audience is not as trained in the analysis of data, we need to augment that communication to suit the audience's needs to understand narratives more than the raw data. So, when we encounter the same data within a story, the brain can link it to cause, context, and emotion, which makes it easier to process. The core part of a story is that there is causality and that there is a context within which the data operates. Based on both of these aspects, the audience can feel the emotion that the data is trying to communicate. I understand if this may seem like a radically new idea, that how can numbers contain emotions? But every single change in data or every single consistent pattern in data has an underlying emotion that we can portray with our stories. In the further lectures, we will keep discussing how we can do this, but for now, let us make ourselves comfortable with the idea that the two things that we have been discussing at the beginning of every lecture, numbers and narratives, are not that different from each other. Every number has a narrative attached to it. Here's an example. Instead of saying that the dropout rate in rural Bihar is 43%, consider this example. 14-year-old Meena from Gaya walked 5 kilometers daily to attend school until rains flooded the only bridge. She dropped out like thousands of others that year. Bihar's rural dropout rate soared to 43%. Do you see what is happening? There is a character, there is an emotion, there is conflict, a lot that goes on that leads up to the data. It serves the data pretty well, but it does not jump right into it. It gives context, it gives setting. It almost makes you feel emotional for the protagonist of the story. This version provides context, human detail, extremely important, and emotion, which enhances cognitive engagement. So think about it. The first sentence that you saw is only reporting the data to you in a rather bland manner. You are not likely to engage with it deeply. You may look at it, you may read it, and you may forget about it. However, the second example is more likely to stay with you because it has had an emotional effect on you. You have imagined a 14-year-old Meena. You have imagined her walking 5 kilometers daily to attend school. You have imagined rains flooding the only bridge. And then the penny drops. She drops out of school like thousands of others that year. This is the momentum that builds in a story and makes it memorable for whoever is trying to engage with the data that you will eventually communicate at the end of the story. So here's an exercise. Take any one statistic that you know and rewrite it as a short, real-world story. It is okay if you don't understand the mechanics of the story yet. We are yet to study them, and we will study them in depth in the upcoming lectures. However, look at the example that we just studied and try to emulate it in your own style. Take any one statistic that you know and rewrite it as a short, real-world story and see what happens. It will turn the statistic into a lively narrative about human emotions. I will get back to you with further details about stories and memory. The second focal point of our lecture today is stories and memory. Memory often refers to how well can people remember and retain the information that you communicate to them. Studies in cognitive psychology show that stories are easier to remember than isolated facts. So, if you give them a list of things to remember, it is highly likely that they will forget either one or two details in between because they will have to cram it. They will have to rote memorize the details that you have given them. But if you tie it together through a story, it is highly likely that it will stick in their memory. Not only will they retain the information, they will understand it better as well. If you remember, in our school times, when we had to memorize complex formulas, our teachers often told us to chain them together through a story, a made up story, something that will make sense in our mind and will often be an inside joke between you and the teacher. But it worked because whenever we had to remember them for the exams, all we needed was to recall that story in our mind. That is the power of storytelling. Once you turn that into a story, it is highly likely that your audience will have a stronger retention of your data as much as they want to. Why does this happen? Stories create mental images. That's more important. They can help imagine things. They can help bring an entire setting to life. So they create a mental image and a cause-effect chain, which are easier for the brain to store. More than just raw data, if you communicate what has caused that data outcome and what is the effect in terms of its importance, that is what sticks better. That is what people remember even more. That is why stories work. The use of characters, sequences, and emotions allow stories to anchor facts in meaningful ways. All of these are different components of storytelling. Characters, as you are aware, are vehicles that drive the story forward. Sequences are a chain of events, all linked by causes that lead up to the climax. And emotions allow you to move through the story in an affective manner. Here's a real world example. There is an NGO in India known as Arghyam. The NGO Arghyam used real world community stories in their water conservation reports. One such story described a small village where women manually tracked rainfall data. Instead of just publishing rainfall statistics, Arghyam shared narratives of these women, and readers could recall more about the data later as the story gave it shape. There is a character, there is a method that is unique, and something that incites curiosity. So even in their technical reports, mind you, these are serious technical documentations, they have used storytelling. I understand if you would think that stories are necessarily for non-technical audiences. However true that may be, many such instances exist where technical reports and technical documentation have also employed storytelling as a medium to communicate their data insights. Here's a reflection for you. Think of one story that you've heard in class or in media recently. What parts of it stuck with you? Were any numbers involved in those stories? You can think about your morning newspaper as well. Many news reports have numbers at the center of it, but it matters how they report it so that it sticks with you and you understand what the importance of that number is. Now coming to the third focal point of today's lecture, stories and decision making. Humans make decisions not just with logic, but also with emotion and context, areas where stories are especially effective. Logic is something that we have mastered with our module on critical thinking and logical reasoning. But the emotional part and the context of data arrives when we start talking about storytelling. In this context, there is a psychological principle that I want to share with you. This principle is known as narrative transportation. Once again, this psychological principle is known as narrative transportation. When readers or listeners are emotionally transported into a story, they are more likely to be persuaded even if the data remains the same. Think about when you were trying to imagine a world that a novel or a movie presented to you. You were, in a way, transported to that world. You were taken physically from your current form and you were trying to empathize with the characters in that world as if you were a part of that world itself. In such a setting, your audience is more likely to be convinced for your suggestions and recommendations, even if you are communicating the raw data that you would have without the story. Here's an example to make this more concrete. In a health campaign in rural Maharashtra, researchers ran two ads, one with statistics about malnutrition and another that told the story of Raju, a malnourished child whose condition improved after a specific intervention. Both the ads are giving you the same data. They are giving you the same outcomes. However, the design, the narrative design of the second ad centers around one story and the emotional impact that it has on the audience, where the first one is just plain reporting of the data at hand. The second version, in fact, led to a higher uptake in clinical visits despite both versions containing the same data. That is exactly what I wanted to communicate in the previous part. Narrative transportation ensures that your audience associates with the character not only psychologically but also emotionally. So, even if you are catering the same data, it has a dramatically better effect than just reporting numbers as they are. The story created empathy and relatability. I understand that we might be using this word quite a lot these days. Relatability. The content that we see on social media, the kind of things that we study, the kind of things that we read and watch, all of them need to be relatable if we need to be entertained by them. So this story right here is relatable. It turned abstract data into an actionable insight. It gave real stakes for people to care about. It gave real emotions for people to care about. And that is why it converted in a higher rate of effect as compared to just a report on data. Based on this insight, there is a little exercise that we can do together. Imagine that you are writing to persuade local readers to invest in clean water. Would you begin with this line? 65% of villages lack clean drinking water? Or would you believe in this line? In a small village near Nashik, children miss school because of frequent stomach infections caused by unsafe water. Based on these two options, choose the story that works for you better. Think about why, and then write the first line that will hook the readers and make them care about the data. Now that we have understood cognition, memory, and decision making, I want to talk to you about the cultural relevance in storytelling. You might have felt that some stories are universal, where some stories matter necessarily in a certain cultural or geographical area. The fables that we have in India as Panchtantra, Hitopadesh, or Jatak tales may be different than the fables in A Thousand and One Arabian Nights, in Aesop's fables, or in Brothers Grimm's fairy tales from Germany. All of them are different stories related to different cultures. In diverse settings like India, locally grounded stories resonate even more. For example, in rural development reports, using local names, places, customs, and even dialect can increase trust and relatability. Whereas in urban contexts, analogies involving traffic, mobile phones, or daily tech use can make data more digestible. I understand that you would have started thinking about many instances, be it in advertisements, marketing campaigns, or awareness initiatives, where they would have targeted you with these specific nuances no matter where you are in India. And that is exactly what I'm talking about. These people who turn data into stories or who turn core messages into stories have an expertise in narrative design, and they understand the cultural relevance that is necessary in storytelling, and they turn each story to fit the cultural milieu of that particular audience. That is why they work. That is why they speak to us. That is why also many international brands come to India and they adapt to Indian cultures and Indian languages to market their products. Here's an example coming back to data. A campaign in Bengaluru used metro travel times to explain the benefits of an AI-based traffic prediction model. People connected more with that than with a technical explanation of the algorithm. Why? Because the Bengaluru metro is a central part of their daily lives. Turning that into a character and the setting where the story takes place makes it culturally more relevant for the audience to resonate with. That is why such a campaign turns into a more successful model of talking to people based on their real life daily experiences. Before we move forward, here's a quick reflection for you. What kind of real world examples would you use to explain a complex topic to your grandparents? This is a fun exercise because you would have to adjust the real world examples to fit their worldview, not your own. And you have to explain a complex topic. Choose a topic of your choice and choose the real world examples of your choice. My only condition is that you have to explain them to your grandparents. That is the strict definition of your audience. That's a challenge. Think about it. I'll come back to you with more comments on something called cognitive load. What is it? Right after this reflection. We have understood cognition through the course of this lecture. It just means our thinking and mental processing. So, what do we mean when we say cognitive load? Complex data can overwhelm readers. I hope that you and I are on the same page on that so far. This overwhelming sensation is called cognitive overload. That is when The readers are exhausted, they are tired, and they start losing attention. They stop caring about the data that you are catering to them. In that case, stories can help reduce this load by breaking data into chunks, as in story points, sequencing ideas with a cause effect relationship, and framing data within familiar contexts. For example, instead of showing a data table about farmers' crop loss, a narrative like this: Ramesh planted cotton in Vidarbha. This year, unpredictable rains destroyed half his field. The regional average: 47% loss. This form of storytelling frames the data, if you see, and it reduces any abstraction. You could say pretty simply that the regional average of crop loss is 47% in Vidarbha post unpredictable rains this year. That one line gives me nothing. It gives me no emotion, no narrative, nothing to care about. But as soon as me turning Ramesh into a character, the audience is hooked. Because now they can associate with Ramesh emotionally and they know exactly what he must be feeling upon having lost half his field of crops. That is why the cognitive load of 47% being prepared and processed by your mind decreases suddenly. Because now you have a character to associate with. Now you have ideas being broken down into chunks, into a logical sequence, and into a cause-effect sequence to understand in your mind. If you found this to be fun, here's an exercise for you. You can pick one complex term, for example, logistic regression or statistical significance, or even any of the terms that we have learned in the course so far. Could be critical thinking, logical reasoning, anything that is your own taste and interest. This time, explain it to a teenager, not your grandparent, to a teenager using a story. Learn the principles that we have learned in this lecture and use them in your own practice of explaining something complex to a teenager. You have to understand, teenagers these days don't have the attention span of sitting through a long story. So you will have to optimize it for their attention span and the kind of language that they use. That's your challenge. Try to turn it into an interactive story so that your teenage audience does not lose focus and cares about what you have to say. In the end, I want to reinstate why storytelling is not optional. I could have turned this into a soft skill kind of a lecture and restricted within one or two classes. Why did we choose to turn this into a full module? This is why storytelling is not optional. With cognition, stories help us process and structure data. With memory, stories help us retain that information. And eventually, the goal of both cognition and memory is decision making. Stories help us act on what we have learned. Good storytelling does not distort the truth. Like we said, in terms of data stories, it is different from fiction. It does not concoct or distort any kind of truth. It delivers the truth in a human, engaging, and meaningful way. And that is a critical skill in data science. So that was it from my side for this lecture. We were discussing why stories matter, but not only at a superficial level. We went into depths about cognition, memory, and decision making. In the next lecture, we will discuss the elements of narrative design with a key focus on structures and arcs. They may seem like similar words, but rest assured, there is a key, important, critical difference between structures and arcs. What is it? Coming right up in the next lecture. Hang around for that. Until then, stay curious, keep learning, and all the best. I will see you in the next class. Until then, namaskar.